Alrighty. We are streaming and ready to get into my workday for this plugin that I'm calling Mackity. And I got a whole bunch of stuff going on, so that should be interesting. I am only a minute or so late, but I had like grocery shopping and portioning stuff for the freezer and stuff. As you know, this is just me. I'm Chris from Airwindows. I essentially am Airwindows. So basically that way that works is I have to do everything myself. And that includes hauling my own firewood and who knows what else. But for the time being, we're going to code a plugin that acts like an old Mackie mixer, and I have interesting show and tell for today. So this should be good fun. As you can hear, I'm playing a raw audio track in the background here. I'm also going to do my usual thing of black screen. Hi, this is black screen because I want to pause the YouTube Studio playback on the black screen so that I don't have to stare at it. And I can probably turn it back on now, but there we go. There, if I pause that, then I'm not constantly distracted by flashing lights and things. Flashing lights are for you to look at. The live stream, because they'll be floating around in the background. All I need is some indicator lights and I'm good to go. Okay, so all in all, I think we are about ready to roll. The drum thing is about to loop. I'll see what that does. Not that big of a derp there. So hey, we're going to do some coding. I don't know how many folks are here. I've got my little setup going on so that you can see me, because this is essentially like a television job. Weird though that may seem. And you know, I need to make a way where I can move all these lights around in more interesting ways. But for our Hangout section today, before we get into the coding section, I have some interesting news on a number of subjects. Hey, Bo, one of our standbys. And as people, everyone is basically me, you, and one other person at the moment, but who knows how many might turn up. Maybe more people would turn up if I put a, they probably don't let you get publicity if you don't put a description in your video. So coding a Mackie 1202 emulation with reference to real audio as opposed to imaginary audio. But yeah, I am not fooling as far as that's concerned. We've got some real breakthrough as far as reference material goes, and that should be pretty exciting. How's my levels? I could probably goose it just a bit. I don't spend a lot of time shouting, and this lavalier mic is the only way that you can hear the demos and things. So I have to turn that up. You get very good bass off of it because my monitoring is very good, but you're still only hearing speakers. So before we get into that, and let me give you a little taste. This is what we're going to be referring to. That is real Mackie 1202 input channel getting smashed in a very pure form. And I've also got another reference, which is this one. That's the real thing. That's the real Mackie. And that's the one where you go through the entire mix down system. In other words, you run through the phone, the pans, and the EQs. And I had an experience regarding this, which has to do with the names of my audio files, but we're going to get to that pretty quickly, I think. We'll start off, I think, with another little bit of show and tell. How come vocals sound pitchy over phones and laptops? I don't know. I think you've asked this more than once. I don't know the answer to that one, or indeed whether they do. It might be just you hearing it that way. I would also point out that phones and laptops are very mid-rangey. And if you're able to perceive pitch more readily over strikingly band-limited stuff, rather than getting distracted by like bass and such, then you might simply be hearing the vocals more accurately because you're not hearing other stuff. That's a possibility. There is also maybe a correlation to that weird thing where there was a piece of audio and people would either hear it as Yanni or Laurel, the famous Yanni or Laurel audio clip. The key there was whether you were hearing high frequency overtones or lower frequency overtones. And that's how that got manipulated. So if you're having striking experiences with vocals sounding pitchy, it might be because the medium you're listening to, phones and laptops. Oh, by the way, hang on a second. I'm talking to you, but I haven't got the chat window up. So let me go and fix that. If I can, and I bet you I can, like this. Momentarily, we'll see what I'm responding to, which is that. So there we go. So yeah, hi chat. Chat's right here. Now, that's maybe my best guess, like re-examining it. Have you never heard of the Yanni or Laurel thing? Oh, you have because you're grinning. Yeah, I'm guessing that it might have something to do with that, but it's also down to a phone or a laptop presenting you only mid-range frequencies for the most part. And in this way, you might be hearing the pitchiness of vocals more accurately. So there's that. That's a possibility. So let me grab various support materials, namely coffee. I might have to jump up and deal with a package being delivered because I've got two things that are showing up. Neither of them are technically audio related. One of them is a order of Chinese spices, as in some peppers and some hua jiao, which is Sichuan cold pepper. It's a kind of tree nut. And one of my staple foods is this chicken and rice stuff with Thai peanut sauce, which is basically a soy sauce with some peanut in it. I also cook peanuts in the recipe, and I heat it up with this Roland hot sesame oil and put some of the hua jiao in there. And the deal with that is I'm running out of the Roland hot sesame oil, and the store that I was getting it doesn't seem to have it anymore. So that's tragic because I eat this stuff almost all the time. So I'm looking into upgrading my Asian cooking and using the real peppers and the real hua jiao. And I may be pronouncing that wrong because I do not speak Chinese. The other thing is a power steering rack. My car is broken, it doesn't work properly. And what's broken is that the power steering cuts out on me sometimes. Not during use, but anytime I start the car up, it's either going to have the power steering on or to be completely off. And this is not great. I mean, in order to stay healthy, I lift weights, so I'm able to handle it anyhow. It's only a Subaru. I've been thinking about doing a cooking stream. I've been thinking about doing videos of like breakfast with Chris or dinner with Chris, because I have a whole routine going on. For breakfast, I make a bowl of oatmeal with a piece of banana in it, and I make a French omelet. By that I mean I take an egg and I swirl it up. I'm basically using a Boy Scout fire starting technique for the whisk there. I put the egg in a little glass and I put a whisk in there and go until it's very thoroughly, it's like practically foamed up. Maybe add various things. And then when the pan is hot enough and I've got some butter in there, I pour it in and floop it around as if I was Julia Child. And hang on, I'm clipping. Let me dial my loudness down a little bit. I whoop it around like I'm Julia Child and make a no spatula, no fold French style omelet. And that's actually pretty hard to do. I've been doing that for years. It's what I make every morning for breakfast. And I've gotten to the point where I can do it pretty good. So it might be worth doing, if not a live stream, because that'd be a drag, just filming it sometime. And then if it works out correctly, uploading that, like, hey, breakfast with Chris, and it's a little picture of what I do every morning. Because the interesting thing about cooking is you're balancing. Oh, I would burn everything if I was talking about cooking. Doing cooking properly, you're having everything go at the same time, and you're bouncing around rapidly among different activities. So I've sort of learned the little dance of breakfast, and that's how that works. Dinner is a lot easier because it's just the Asian style stir fry. But yeah, I settle upon these things. I honestly advocate learning stuff that you like pretty much every time and learning to cook it, and not. It can take some time. It'll take some time out of your day, but if you're cooking food from scratch, it's going to be typically more healthy than if you're eating like prepackaged stuff. And it can also be cheaper, and that's important. And yeah, I've got a small number, as in about 3 recipes that I just do. It's almost like the people who subsist on that stuff called Soylent, which I would try, except for that it has sucralose in it in large quantities, and I don't like that artificial sweetener. But it's almost like that. You find something that you can get good at. You don't get really, if you eat eggs for breakfast and even like a proper French omelet, you're not going to get sick of it. It's the best way. It's absolutely the best. And every time you make it, kind of like making coffee, which I make a lot of coffee too, it's always a little bit different. So that becomes an interesting thing. Let me bounce over to another interesting thing before we start the actual Mackie coding, because 15 minutes in, we've got people here. Remember these? I've got a new innovation on this stuff. This is my chord chart. And it's the chords that fit in any given mode and a circle of fifths that you can rotate, where all of these are going to be a mode with all of these chords relating to that mode along the spoke that it is. And what I was doing was trying to figure out a way to make a kind of slide rule out of this. That was always sort of the idea. It's been evolving. I've been learning how to do it. So the first thing I did was I took a piece of paper. Actually, not this piece of paper. I think it was another piece of... I took another piece of paper and cut out holes for all of these, and then decided to cut out holes for all of the adjacent slots that were the same chord. Because like you got an A minor here, and then you got an A minor here, and then you got an A minor here, and you can find all of the same chord in nearby keys. So I went, look, okay, what would be good here? Where do we find this? Here's an E minor, here's another E minor. Note that there are some funny things about this, like in the Locrian mode, which is the B minor in piano white keys, which is what this is. That doesn't really count as a chord. In fact, I've blocked it out in some of my slide rule stuff. And the reason it doesn't count as a chord is because it doesn't have a fifth. It has a diminished fifth. It has that like satanic interval, where it's the diminished fifth or the augmented fourth. So it counts in the sense of you could say that it's minor because it takes a minor third, but it doesn't take the fifth. So it's not necessarily a good chord to have. It shows up in the adjacent key with the fifth because that's the note that changes. In the adjacent key, you start getting the F sharp. And you go over one of the accidentals changes. This is your new key, and you can't play a B minor chord properly with the fifth. And then I realized I'm counting the chords that are the same. Why don't I look at the chords that changed? And that turned out to be a really interesting breakthrough. In fact, I'm going to scooch over here and grab another piece of paper that I had. I work a lot of this stuff out on paper. That's a good way of going about it. Maybe I'll scooch this over so that I can see the video feed. I made this, and it blocks out the D chord. This is the only chords that aren't already represented in this key. And you can see the B minor is there. That's actually the Locrian mode. And these keys are the keys that you get off the white keys of the keyboard. And if you do a clockwise key change on the circle of fifths, you start getting a F sharp minor. You can get the B minor. You can get a D seventh chord. The bottom ring is the seventh chords. And if you go the other direction, you can get a G minor, and you can get a B minor. So I went, hey, this is kind of what I was looking for, because you could start anywhere. You could say, let's see, where are we? We've got this, we've got this. If you pick this one, that is giving you, you can be in E minor, which is guitar riff city. Like this is a good guitar riff key to be in. It's pretty close to the white keys on the keyboard, but not quite. And if you're in the guitar riff key, that means you can play these chords. C, D7, A minor, B minor, those are all fair game. E minor, A minor, B minor is a blues progression, of course. And you can also go to F or D, D minor specifically, in order to get a key change to an adjacent key. Very, very few changes. Both of those will include the note that is the key change. And you can also go to D flat minor or F sharp minor or A7. And those will also be the next key along. So then I start studying it and going like, well, if we do this, what happens if you keep going? Because we're looking for a slide rule. So how far out does stuff go? And if I was to take these and go, okay, let's have this represented. I'm having a hard time lining this up. It's a good thing I'm showing the screen in a way that I can see it. It makes me stare off at the screen that I can see, but it also means that I can frame this correctly. What happens if you keep going? Like you were going to go clockwise key change, that takes you to F sharp minor. What happens if you were going to go to the new key that was the stuff represented, only the new notes in that, and it turns out the same thing holds. It keeps going like that, which means we get something that looks kind of like this. This way of doing it means you can start anywhere and go in one direction or the other, and you'll find any given chord in here somewhere based on which direction you're going from any particular point. And the farther off the center you go, the more far out that chord is going to seem. You can get there, you can use it, but this shows you which ones are crazier and which ones are not. And I made a proper slide rule that I have to hold in a place where you can see it. Boy, do I need to use this. This is such a big slide rule that it's hard to even make out. Trying desperately to position this correctly. There we have it. So what you get is those are your center chords, and then the stuff that shows in the slots is all of the additional chords you can get to, and more or less how far out they are. It could wrap around even further. But, and the interesting thing about it is, if you are going to the new key clockwise, this note is the note that you add. Like if you start at the B minor diminished, the note that you add is the F sharp. And if you keep going, the note that you add is the D flat, and so on. Whereas if you're going counterclockwise, your F goes to the B flat, and which goes to the E flat. And there's another thing to study about this, which is which notes you can play, where if you're playing a melody, you can step up a perfect fifth or down a fourth. I'm still working on the details around how that stuff works, but you step up a perfect fifth to get to the new key. And there are specific notes that will get you there. It's different for each key, it's different for each mode that you're in. Like if you're in the Ionian mode, a different note will take you there. But you can compose melodies where the change to the new key is going from a melodic note up a fifth to the new accidental, and that makes it sound more natural. And this is the stuff that you can do if you get into like wacky chord theory like this. So one of the things I'm going to be working on, and it might actually be a week's worth of work, it might take the place of a plugin 1 week, is working out a slide rule where you can get this kind of stuff and go like, okay, I am in C Dorian. What is C Dorian? Well, it's going to be a minor because Dorian is a minor sounding mode, and we find it on the slide rule. It would be fun to have it be a circular rule like this, but I think it would be a lot easier for me to make it rectangular. There is no cycle of fourths. It's a different thing. But if you're in C Dorian, these are the chords you can use. This is the chord that you can't really because it doesn't have a fifth. And then these are the adjacent chords. So these are the adjacent keys you can go to. And you can go a fourth to the A flat if you're going to go counterclockwise in the circle of fifths from C Dorian. And starting with, I'm trying to figure out whether it's starting with, I have further reference on this, but this is a deep dive into this stuff. And sometimes this is what I do rather than like jamming music out. So when I know I have this stuff to do, it slows me down as far as recording new tracks or anything, because I know that I want to dig into this a little more. But ideally what's going to end up happening is I'll have things like a cheat sheet where you can slide the slide rule thing around, and it'll show you these various chords, and then you sort of make stuff up and go like, oh, well, here, what could I do going from here to here? I can play in this mode. You can go like, okay, I want major or I want minor or whatever. If you're not getting too fancy, start out there. It'll show you a bunch of chords that will always work. And then you go like, well, what if I was to do something weird and wacky? What even is weird and wacky? Like I'm in the key of C. What counts as weird and wacky? Well, you can look at this and go like, these are my choices. These are my choices in that if I go to these over here, these adjacent ones, I'm doing something that's also weird and wacky, but it's a different key and a modulated. Or I'm just including a different note in there. And then if I want to go really weird and wacky, I can construct chords that go all the way over here or something like that. And figure things out sort of mechanically like that. At which point you write down the chords that you've got, you play them, and you've got something. And with a bit of luck, it sounds and feels like music and like it's making sense, like you understand this music theory stuff that is so challenging. And this is from somebody who has not gone to like Berklee College of Music or whatever. So it's just hacking with music theory. And I have high hopes for where that could lead. Now let's see, let me bounce back. Yeah, Wath, if the cycle of fourths is the cycle of fifths in the other direction, then it's already there. Just go counterclockwise. Excuse me. That was probably pretty loud. Sometimes my health struggles with me a little bit. Let's have some more coffee and switch into this other mode. I'll check to see that it's visible. Yep, looking pretty good. So what we're going to do today, a half an hour in, is fool with this. And I'll just play it a little bit while drinking the rest of my coffee and figuring out what I'm doing. Meanwhile, yeah, the thing is, if you just consider them maybe suggestions. And some stuff sounds good and other stuff doesn't. Like, the deal with going there are no rules when creating music is you're very capable of producing just horrible noise that's extremely unappealing. Like, randomness is not necessarily your friend any more than perfect regularity is your friend. There's going to be a sweet spot. Like, you know how You know how I joke around sometimes about how I'm always looking for the golden ratio everywhere? Here, we'll turn that off for a moment. You know how sometimes I'm always looking for the golden ratio anywhere? That's relevant. If there were no rules, I wouldn't be doing that. I would go, any number is as good as any other, any choice is as good as any other. Let's just make a bunch of weird stuff. That's fine. But then when some things are just a lot more appealing, you start looking for the guidelines. You start looking for the underlying principles at stake. And so in this music theory stuff, I'm very much looking for the underlying principles, though I do not have the music theory training to, like I watch all those Adam Neely videos and stuff like that. That's somebody who's been to music school and has read all of these advanced books on harmony and stuff. It's interesting because the thing is, you can get really good at that kind of stuff, and yet the music that you make can be opaque and practically unlistenable. I think my example there, and I got to tread cautiously, I don't want to be insulting. I'm thinking of folks like Alan Holdsworth, who was a brilliant music theorist. Thing is, it's kind of like the folks that were doing serial music. You can do music theory that is so clever that it has an underlying logic, and yet a regular listener can't follow what's going on. Like, it's making some kind of sense, but sometimes if you get too out there, it doesn't even seem to make any kind of sense. I'm a big fan of a John Scofield composition called Protocol. And there's a famous composition called Giant Steps by John Coltrane. And those are doing very abstract things. Like, Giant Steps works like this. You've got your main key, and then the nearest key he goes to is actually this one over here. So it's not even fitting into the category of notes that you can reasonably arrive at. He goes like yoink, and then yoink. It's going around the circle as thirds. It's going like all the way around to here and then all the way around to here, but it's doing it in a regular cycle, and it's stepping over one each time, like steps over one, steps over one. Each time it's like it's resolving to the new key center. So Coltrane was able to, and that's perhaps why it's called Giant Steps. He's doing the key changes so aggressively, but it's the simplest, most direct, most obvious approach to those key changes. And I don't know what Protocol does, but it does something fairly similar in that it seems to follow like you kind of feel as if every half bar or so stuff shifts up a semitone or something. It's a little difficult to work out what's going on there. And Wath, the interesting thing about it is that blues follows completely different rules. With blues and rock and roll and rhythm and blues and stuff like that, or indeed funk music, where you're placing the note in time is extremely important. And jazz also brings in the tonal quality of it. Like, what are your overtones doing? How bright or dark is your note? In blues, what are your overtones doing? What is the tonality? What is the emotive expression of what you've got there? So there's a lot of stuff that the music theory doesn't even touch. None of this tells you where you're going to place that note in time. It doesn't tell you how bright or dark the note is going to be. It is just this raw music theory stuff where it's the 12-note scale. And you don't have to stick to a 12-note scale, but things get really out there when you don't. See King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard for example of that. So yeah, it's interesting in its own right, and will take you to, like, if you're a fan of Steely Dan. I know people who just hate Steely Dan, and I love them. I enjoy where those chords go, and the neat thing about it, and they must have a theory going on for this because it all works out, and their music does not sound similar to other people's music, but it sounds very similar to themselves. That's kind of how the rules work, is you make your own rules. You make your own habits for what to do. And if you do that, you wind up creating these new things that didn't exist before that are specific to you. And that's a great goal to have. Let's bounce back to this, because I'm going to rush into this to some extent. I feel like I want to cover some of that. Bouncing around a little bit and making sure that things are showing up properly on the screen. Yep, we're good. So yeah, here's the deal. We're going to fire up Mackity again. And as we know, this is a little plugin with a bunch of stuff that I'm kind of not even using at the moment. And right now I've got it nailed down to a very simple algorithm. I didn't even save the background algorithms. Well, as a matter of fact, that's not quite true, because people are very clear about how, like, oh, major keys are happy and minor keys are sad. And early music theorists had elaborate theories on how any given note or semitone, they'd be like, take these as individual notes. They would go, stuff in the key of B minor is unusually sad and morbid. And they would be trying to work out what the feel of music in these respective keys was inherently like. Almost like phrenology or something like that. They were like, it's like the Spinal Tap thing, D minor, the saddest of keys. But we're wandering away from that for the moment because Mackity needs some work. And I had got a distortion factor that had a sort of Mackie-ish vibe to it. In fact, I can probably even demonstrate that to some extent. Might need to switch away from this so that I can see what I'm doing a little better. Hey, Ahmed. And we had it going on where I could get some distortion going on. So there's that. However, this is what the real thing sounded like. Not wildly different, but there's more. I was hanging out in a stream with another YouTuber, guy who I quite enjoy, does YouTube under the name of The Daydream Sound and does these live streams talking about samplers for the most part. And he's probably around my age, maybe a little bit younger. He's talking to a very different demographic because he's talking to this like very much hip-hop crowd on the subject of samplers. But the thing I love about him is that he's got a number of interesting, like he's a big astrology fan. That's interesting to hear about. But he also has a very sensible grasp of like small business and entrepreneurship from his own experience. And if he's talking about people trying to be a success in the music business, this guy's worth listening to. He really knows the underlying concept. And that is something that I would back up fully. So that's always interesting. And I've learned lots of interesting things about samplers and such. And when I told him I'm making a plugin on the Mackie 1202, he's like, oh yeah, I used that stuff. In fact, I've used a Mackie 202 to sweeten my masters sometimes. I'm like, oh really? Interesting. And I explained how I had to do a version of this audio, as you can see with this, where I am fooling with the controls. Like this is the bass turned all the way up and the treble turned all the way down. And I could do these various things with it because I figured the important thing was to model how the circuit works. Do the opposite. This is all the treble turned up and the bass turned down. This is just mid-range. That means I can't do only 2 bands. I have to do 3 bands and leave only the middle one untouched. So if you turned the treble and bass down all the way, you'd get this. I was talking about this and the guy went, "You're out of your mind." No, don't do that. You can't do it that way. The pan pot, the EQs are in the signal path. You're not understanding what I'm telling you. He was sweetening his mixes by running into the Mackie 1202 and coming out the inserts on the back of the machine. He's like, yeah, plug in only 1 click, not 2. And you're going to get an insert that is not like the input gain still affects things. And the by the way, I've got high winds today, so if I randomly cut out, it's because my internet or power failed. So bear that in mind. The laptop that you're currently seeing will be fine because it'll be on batteries and I'll be able to continue work even, but the stream could potentially conk out today. Anyway, this guy is telling me like, no, you're doing this completely wrong. You need to put your outputs into, you need to capture off the insert points in the back. I had not done this. So I gave it a try. And I will show you what it sounds like right now, because this was a big discovery. Called it Daydream Drums in honor of him. This is what it's supposed to sound like. Notice something interesting about this? This does not sound that wildly different from the raw track. Got that here. Now you're hearing both of them. Isn't that interesting? That's me turning the gain down. We'll turn it back up again. Notice how that's basically similar sounding? But you can see what it's doing. Except for you can't, you're hearing what it's doing. So what I did was I ran it at a bunch of different levels and I worked out some of what was going on. Like here we are loud again. This is just pure audio, the same as what you're hearing here. We can go from this. This is the raw track. This is what I sent into the Mackie. To this. This is what people are after. The stuff with the EQs, I can still do that. It might be its own thing. But this is one stage of that op amp. It's just that inside the Mackie you get to crank it way the hell up. And the interesting thing about it is we can do this at a much quieter level, but it's still clipping, but you really can't hear it. Like you can see on the meters here, we've got like these meters are showing big variations. You can see how different it is. But this very tight restrictions on those. That's hitting a clipping. And we can see what that looks like too. Let's zoom into one of these snare hits. This is a snare hit, right? See there, we can make this work. Notice how we have this flat topping? Thing is, it's a little interesting. I identified something about this that is unusual, even though it is very much just going into this flat topping and being that kind of limiting factor. But there's more going on than just this. The Mackie is an analog circuit. It has input and output capacitors. And we can see what those do by looking at the output of things like sine waves. Here's a sine wave. And by generating a sine wave, I can also study what this sounds like. That's what it sounds like to push the level into the clipping. It's going to need to have the same kind of development of harmonics. You can kind of hear it go up that way. So I need to make it do that. And if we zoom right in on that, what we'll get is a clipped wave, but notice something? This is a 20 Hertz sine. The output of the op amp is not keeping its energy up. This is what you get when you have a square wave and a high-pass filter after it. The lows drop off because you can't keep an infinite amount of bass energy in there, like it's DC, essentially. When you have your square wave, and it's 20 Hertz, meaning it's 20 cycles per second, and you have a high-pass filter, what you get is this slope on the square wave that you're producing. That means it's a high-pass filter after the clipping. And that could be due to power supply limitations, but it's also very likely because it's going through a capacitor on the way out. It's going through a capacitor on the way to back into the recording again. And that's what this looks like. There's more as well. For instance, if you go through all the filters, you wind up getting funny things like and that's not one of them. I'm going to find one. That is rolling off the high end. Let's see what we got here. That is just high end turned up a lot. And in here somewhere I had an example That sounds bright. I'm looking for a particular behavior here, not really finding it. But I'll try. Like there's waveforms in here, if I can find them. Let's just scan around until I do. And it's what it looks like. Oh, see, that's a high frequency with low frequency roll-off built in. And here we have a funny sort of shape going on here, and that's the filtering. That's the sound that this particular filtering makes. I want to find one of the really characteristic ones, because some of these are the shapes that you get out of simply doing certain kinds of filtering. And that's not at the heart of, oh, hang on, I just saw something. Where did I find that? Aha. What you see here is a sort of high frequency boost and mid-range suck, and then bass boost. And it makes this. And you can hear the sort of buzziness on there. That's because we've got this high frequency thing going on. So a little wiggliness on there. And it's essentially just this little spike that is immediately going away. Like it's major high boosts right at the beginning. This is heavy use of those EQ controls. A mid boost, high boost, mid cut. This part is dropping off, and then bass boost is leaving it fairly still boosty on the way out. It is supplanting some of the roll-off that is present in the regular circuit. So rather than being really flattened out, it's almost acting like it's trying to be a proper square wave without any fall off there. I wonder whether that noise is the power steering thing that's being delivered to me. Probably not. So yeah, this looks like really weird artifacts, but in a way it's not. That's just the EQs. But we've already decided that we're going to try to put together one without the EQs. We're going to put together one with the Mackie 1202 captured out of the insert points, because that doesn't run through the pan. That doesn't run through the EQs. It's fine. I can do one later that has the EQs. That'd be fine. But the heart of what we're searching for here isn't this. What we see here is not what we're going to try to do, because this has to do with doing weird things with the EQ, and while that's cool in its way, that's not this sound. This is the inserts. This is what people were putting on their masters. This is what people were doing with the Mackie in terms of using it as just a sound processor and making their mixes sound better. So that is what Mackity needs to be. I can extend outwards further to do one with all of the EQs for people who want to just do really crazy tone shaping. But this is what we're looking for. Now remember the signs? We've got some interesting things to learn here. This is all still science. As you can see, now notice something about this. Does this look like a peak limited loudness war thing to you? This is all test tones, and the test tones are all into the clipping, right? Why isn't that all going to the same point? That's a question for chat if you'd like to try to answer that, because that has a great deal to do with what we're going to be doing today. as I continue to drink my coffee. This is me stepping up 1 dB at a time. So I'm going to need to model it so that it sounds like that when we push the volume into it. And now we're doing it with a higher frequency tone. And as you can see, same deal. We are clipping. This is all sines. What's happening is this doesn't always work quite the same. That is a little spike in the amplitude on the output of the op amp. What do we see when we see that it is louder than the stuff near it? We'll zoom in. Oh, look. That's a little overshoot. That's a little hard clippy right there. We're pushing so hard something else is happening. What else could we learn from this? Look, it's a real striking overshoot. That's when we turn up so loud that it's kind of pushing beyond the edges. What could be causing that? We go up even farther. I might have to turn my monitors down here for this. Look, that's louder too. Look, we have the overshoot. Higher frequency, more of an overshoot. Something is going on where our high frequencies get to overshoot where the low frequencies clip. That can be modeled. Let's explore further. We've got more bass notes, more careful distortions. In this one, I'm modeling where each particular frequency distorts, like a 20 hertz tone was just beginning to distort about a dB hotter than some of the other tones, and this is because our capacitors in the circuit are cutting out some of that frequency, so it takes a little more volume going in to clip it. That shows me where the lows are rolling off. I have two separate roll-offs, one before and one after the clipping. And this is me finding out where all of those were. I wrote them down and then I didn't bother keeping them because the key factors are elsewhere. That is a super high frequency tone captured at 96K. This is like a 20K tone. You can see it on the meter, but you don't hear anything. And we're not really hearing it in person either. One thing about the Mackie is that it's high frequencies. Like I'm clipping this as hard as I can. No square wave. Not even captured at 96K. These circuits are rolling off. The circuit is not giving me super high frequencies from distorting sine waves into them. But it doesn't end there. There, that is a very high frequency, and we're distorting that. Let's see what that looks like. See how we're beginning to get a bit of a funny overshoot going on? Well, it's interesting to me, and it's going to give people a good sounding Mackie emulation that's very low CPU and very efficient. So That's worth it. Also note that this is all at that higher amplitude level, whereas the low frequency, just barely distortions aren't as loud as this. This is more than you can normally get. So that's another worth a emulation thing there. We got our high frequency. We've got a lower frequency that is also being distorted. I'm testing that out. A lower frequency still. And we will look at that. And we'll see that in this one, we do have that spike at the end there. It's the extremes can be louder, or if you're not distorting them that hard, here's us getting louder and beginning to clip. Even at our mid-range frequency, the clip is fairly smooth until we're hitting it so hard that the slew rate going into it is enough. And you see, this is funny. Like about a week or so, a week from now, I'm going to get together with the guy, that Ole Larkin guy that does the iPlug framework, and he's going to walk me through making the M1 plugins. Hopefully, I can get enough of a start on it in a single session that I can be off and running, but we'll see. I'm willing to go back to the well, and I'm actually paying for his attention because he has a Patreon where you can pledge large amounts of money and get an hour of personal coaching, and that's what I'm doing. It's just not on his framework. It is on how to operate your basic Xcode. And I can't work that stuff out. So he's able to do it, and so he's going to show me. But I've never seen him do anything like this, because it takes all kinds, and there are all different ways of approaching things. You could approach something like a Mackie and go like, okay, let's measure the frequency response, and essentially leave it at that. Oh, I EQ'd it to be the same EQ as the Mackie, and it's distorting, so we're good. Here's the deal. When you run the roughly 1K or 3K or something like that sine into it and distort it, as the speed of the slew going in there gets more aggressive, we start getting this overshoot that is hotter than the limit of the steady state distortion that the op amp can put out. Now, I can't tell you exactly why it's doing this, but by God, I can measure that it is. And I thought to do that. This is not the most extreme demonstration of it either. We have another test tone that we can take advantage of that will show us even more. This is just showing that it is very definitely happening. Like, it's basically trying, this is what you get when you're trying to encapsulate a really hard-edged clip with lots of harmonics at, say, 96K, is the samples will do this to represent it. And we swoop down, crank up more. As you can see, as we get that overtone on there, that's our overshoot. You can see it right there. And the overshoot is swinging considerably beyond what the steady state volume is able to do. And it's a little fuzzy, it's a little raspy. Here's where things get really, really interesting. Hear that? That's what it sounds like to have a pulse wave. That's not really the thing that I'm going to be doing, but this is a pulse wave being distorted into it. And I learned some things there. For instance, its attempt to do the pulse wave and resample it is causing this to happen. And this is kind of like doing a sample rate conversion, is you wind up getting this kind of stuff going on. That is the nearest you can get to a single pulse just sitting over somewhere and everything else being flat. Is the output makes the samples do this. And if the samples do this, the output of your DAC, the output of your digital to analog converter, will be as close as possible to a single spike, and then everything else is flat. That's what this looks like in terms of samples. The samples are never exactly what is on the waveform. The samples are signposts, and you can think of them as like a slalom. In order to make the wave do a single spike and then be gone, it will start building up energy by going between these posts. And then this one is out of place, so it'll spike up. And then these are designed to make it straighten back out again and stay straight as it fades out. The audio waveform will go between these points, not along them. It will not go as a waveform like you see. This is not a waveform, this is the sampling theorem doing its thing. And that's very important, and that is the single pulse wave. But that's nothing compared to what we can measure later. Here's our pulse wave again. Here is a 20 hertz square wave. Check this out. Isn't that interesting? Can you guess what we can learn from this? A square wave coming out of a DC coupled converter, and I think the Motu 16A may be DC coupled, I'm not absolutely sure, but a sufficiently high performance converter will be a square wave. Like you could recapture it and it would be like, okay, yeah, this is a square wave. If it's a 1 hertz square wave, it will still be 1. And voltage stays, voltage goes away. That's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing a bunch of interesting things here. We are seeing that when we have our change of polarity on the square wave, our overshoot here is significantly beyond what the steady state is. There's a real spike there. And then we're also seeing another thing, which is this. 2 slopes. Got the one slope, and then we got the other slope. You know why that is? Because there are 2 filters on each side of the op-amp. So in order to correctly do it, if we put a 20 hertz, let's quickly make a new file. Here's the thing. We can generate tones, rectangle, quite a lot of high wind out there. We'll just call it -3. See, that's perfectly square. If we run this into a modeling thing that models the Mackie correctly, we'll get this out. Period. End of story. This is what the sound is supposed to be. And we can do that with our current Mackity. But I'll tell you what's going to happen is nothing so exciting. We can do that, we just get this. That's because we're not done, not by a long shot. Now another interesting thing we can do, and I'm not sure whether, let's see. We have an Apple filter, I'm looking for just a generic filter, AU filter. There's far too many things on this, but that's fine. In fact, there's far too many things on that, so let's go and try to find one of the Apple filters. I'm going to call that a generic filter. And high shelf. Oh, there we go. AU high pass. There is a high pass filter. We can apply that, and look what happens. A weird, crazy thing. That's what happens. So let's undo that, and let's get something that acts a little bit more like what our thing is really going to be. We're going to roll off at 10 hertz, and no resonance. That's just the cue of the filter. I could be doing this with biquad, actually. And rolling off at 10 hertz, we have a huge effect on this. In fact, let's take the output level out, and we will, but see what I'm trying to demonstrate here? It won't let me do, okay, so let's make extremely low resonance and see what this does. It might not, yeah, we're rolling off so much here. Let's fire up one of my plugins, which is going to more deftly handle this. And demo it. Q. Butterworth 0.7 roughly. See, what's happening there is that we are getting a roll-off that is clipping the output. So one thing we can do here is undo that, and let's just kill the level a lot. 24 dB down. Now, we still have that. And what we'll be trying to do is get something that starts to look like this, or if we were distorting a sine like this is, and the sine has a less sharp slope, so you can see it's not making that funny corner, not making that funny point. This roll-off is what the circuit is doing as far as a high pass, as far as the capacitor built into it. So in theory, we would be able to run Mackity, turn it way up, and have that looking like the output. So what we're going to do is fire up biquad again, and let's see where we can get. The frequency is just about nothing. There's our roll-off. Turn it way down, and maybe like I'm exploring where these settings live, in the belief that I can hear whether I'm even in the ballpark or not. That's rolling off hugely, so we're not going to do that. Frequency of 0 is not literally 0, but it is going to be fairly low. And it's actually boosting things like bypassed. I've got this. When I engage the filter, it's higher, and that's because it's sort of overshooting. There's, we'll see what it does. And yeah, our lowest setting is enough to cause this to fall off. But that might not be the only option, because remember, we've also got other forms of high pass. For instance, let's bring in one of my classic IIR filters, infinite impulse response, not a biquad, a more primitive version of that. And that lives in density and drive. I can pull out drive if I can find it. Let's see, where is it? There it is. That's a VST, that's fine. What do we got here? Well, I've got it turned way up for one thing, but so turn it all the way down, out level higher. I'm still getting a small boost here, and I'm going to do a couple of quick tests. Firstly, if I do not have the high pass engaged, we see, I'm probably going to go for the AU next time too. And also let us go back to this because drive isn't going to give me that boosty quality, the resonant quality. And we'll go to the AU version of drive for simplicity, not drive 2 either, that's too complicated. And we're going to try to make it a bypass. So no additional boost, no high pass, output level of 1, dry wet of 1. Result is exactly what I put in. But when I start bringing in the high pass, that's where we start seeing something. Let's hear what this sounds like. And that is what that high pass sounds like on a 20 hertz tone. Is we're getting this boostiness and that's falling away way faster than it needs to. So what we're going to do is a much subtler effect. See, that's boosting it a lot again. We'll set high pass to 0.001. And we don't really see anything there, so we're probably going to have to turn it up a little more than that. That's fine. You probably could measure that change there, but how about 0.01? And voila. And that is the kind of filtration we're going to want to put on our output with one small change, which is that is an exponential curve. And we don't really want an exponential curve, but the output we see here is probably closer to an exponential curve than we think. We're going to want a filter rate that is a comparable speed of fall off here. So we're clearly falling off too fast on this one. We'll undo it again. Go into here again. Split the difference. Now what does it look like? Now it looks like maybe not enough. I don't know, I could amplify that and get a closer sense of what it would actually be. But we're looking at one of the, this is definitively the output filtering after the op amp, because what we're seeing is the output of a fully clipped op amp, which is going to stay at full voltage until it's not clipped anymore. So the capacitor between the op amp and the recapture into the computer is what's causing this, and we're now dialing in what that means. So a little undo, and we'll try that again. I'm probably going to need to grab a pencil or pen from somewhere and make a note on this, so I'll scamper off to do that in a moment. Split the difference. That's looking kind of like the same angle. That's looking kind of like the same fall off there. So let's see, I do have a handy piece of paper, but I don't have a handy maybe I do. My pen is actually under the laptop holding it in place, so I'm going to stick this USB stick in there instead so that I can have the pen back. Give me my pen back. Sort of droops over a little bit. Point 75. So I'm going to want the drive high pass, and this will give me the output filtering is a high pass of this specific behavior. But that's not all, because remember, when we got into this? You know what this means? I'll show you what this means. There is a square wave going into this op amp. The square wave is clipping the op amp to a certain point. The input of the op amp is being hit by the square wave and distorted. Because the input of the op amp is going through a filter, the square wave being sent out of the motu also has that kind of slant to it. But if it's a different capacitive value, it will be a different angle. That's what we see here. And you will hear that on the behavior of the distortion. In fact, that's the way that it handles stuff like bass is going to be very strongly altered by this. We're looking at our see, and there's where it falls away. As it stops clipping the op amp, we're seeing the angle, and as you can see, there's that little exponential quality to it. This defines what the input filter is doing. When we clip the op amp so hard that no matter what the input filter is doing, it's still overdriving it, then we see what the output filter is doing, and the output filter goes to here. So running bass into this, you're going to have two separate high-pass filters in play, and one of them is going to be this shape, which is what we get off the input filter that's not distorting. When we are distorting, we're starting to flatten out that again, and we're seeing the slope of the output filter distorting. And as soon as the level of what we're putting in, which is still a square wave, this entire thing is supposed to be just square. When the level drops far enough, because there's the input high-pass filter, it stops clipping the op amp, at which point we're seeing the behavior of the high pass on the square wave here. So we're going to reconstruct how this is made to happen by having two distinct and separate roll-offs. They might actually be a similar roll-off, because the thing is, this could easily be the same filter, but here we see only one high pass because we're clipping the chip, we're clipping the op amp, and no matter what the input does going into it, whether it's high passed or not, you're not going to see this shape, if it's clipped. Like what you'll see is what you see right here, or right here, or right here, in that once the level of this waveform is increased enough, like for instance, if you increase this level like this, if that is past clipping, it's just going to be a straight line from, say, here to here for everything that's clipping, and then the output is only going to be rolling off by so far. But once it's within the range of the op-amp operating linearly, because this is supposed to be a square wave, remember, but there's a high-pass filter in there, that's going to be reducing the voltage going in because it just can't hang on to the amount of voltage continually. It doesn't just keep going, it fades off. And that's why we see the behavior that we see. But I would also note one other interesting thing, which is we're seeing that little spike again. We're seeing that little corner, and we're not going to necessarily get that off of clipping the, like if we take this and we clip it in the digital form, we're not going to get that out of it. So we'll have to figure out a way of representing this Nyquist frequency sample rate, and that might involve doing our interleaving trick. Namely, we can have the interleaving maybe not set up the change in waveform, but we can have it represent this, where there's definitely a spike on the end of it. It's not as big of a spike going into it, so that's probably fine. But we can make this happen algorithmically too, where it hits this, and then it's got a little wiggle at the Nyquist frequency for a bit, just to define that edge. And the end result of that will look like this. It might even be a fairly big spike. This is a fairly big spike when you look at it relative to what this is. That's a real point there. And you know, high frequencies like cymbals and things, let's take a moment and go back to this one. So we got stuff like this, and then we turn it up a lot. That's brightness going on right there. This is also a loud bit. Note that we get our loudest stuff when the hats are happening. Let's zoom in on that. And this is the channel with the hat on it. And we can see that our bass and hat area we can plainly see where the low frequency stuff is. Here, let's extend this a little more. That is a bit of audio, and let's actually copy that to a new document so that we can zoom right in and normalize it. And we got this. And we can plainly see there's our lows. We can see where the subs are rolling off with that same filter output. And then we can see where the highs are spiking way higher than that. And we'll go in and investigate some of those peaks. Here's a spot where there's a bunch of stuff in here. Let's see where they go. And you can see that this is high frequencies from the cymbals. And it's covering a lot of range, although we're also seeing the limitations at 96 kilohertz of how fast this treble can even go. Nothing can go more than the difference between like this point and this point. Same deal. Here's a slightly more of one. Nothing is going to make one sample be up here and the other sample to be at the bottom clipped point. There has to be at least one, more likely two, between them. This is showing us what our maximum slew rate is. And that's also smoothing out the sound. So our bright hi-hats being strung really hard and as loud as possible, this is the maximum output of the circuit, is a shape like this. That's as loud as it's going to get. So we've also got a slew restriction involved here that needs to be taken into account. We're going to have a little bit of slew clipping just to control it. So, you can also see that it's not just white noise. Like if we did white noise, let's show what that would look like. White noise, full crank. Replace selection. So check that out. Check out the difference there. That's what white noise looks like. See how these points are more closely placed? That is not what we get. In fact, you can see the difference in density between the two things. Let's do a chunk this size. Generate tones, that's what we want. See the difference once you start zooming in? I'm pretty sure it's if it's not DC straight, then it's pretty darn close. It's the Motu 16A, and I'm more interested in the distinction between the output of it and the input of the Mackie, because it is a high quality and balanced, it's a high quality enough thing that the limiting factor is going to be the Mackie, because the Mackie is a very low quality thing. And yeah, what we've got here is we can see where the output of the Mackie is, and then it will convert over to, nope, not there. Let's go the other direction. That's white noise. That's Mackie. You can even see, looking at the waveforms, how there's a space in there even though it is a hi-hat cymbal, so it's a noisy, bright thing. Whereas white noise looks more like this. And our peaks, our maximum travel between these things is greater than it is on the real output of the mixer. Our limitation with our super high frequency sting is real different here than it is here. That's real hi-hat cymbal, and this is white noise generated on the computer. So we need to make anything, if we put this into our Mackie emulation, we need to get the other thing out. We can't have this. We can't have stuff like wiggles like this coming out of the Mackie. So one thing we could do is seeing as this is just a experimental pile of stuff. We can just generate pure white noise here. And then, interestingly, that seems like a weird random source. Oh, I'll tell you why. It's because I'm repeating it, that's why. It's not very long. And then do one of our Airwindows slew restrictors and see where that gets me. So this is the most primitive one. And if you just only slew restrict, you get something that starts looking like this. That's maybe not everything that we want. Let's have a quick try at some of the other ones. I got about 20 minutes or so of Codestream. We haven't even done any coding, but part of doing this kind of stuff is the figuring out what to do rather than just coding stuff. Slew 2. We get something that looks like that, which is kind of, I don't know how close that is to what the real deal would be. And then let's have a look at slew 3. We can always look up the code if any of these seem to work particularly well. Slew only is going to be the opposite. And slew 3 starts to look like the kind of stuff we're wanting to create, like it's emphasizing these things. But first, we've got another thing to look into because we never quite finished investigating this. We've got two angles here. So what would be the other angle? Well, we can skip forward a bit. And it's not that easy to see this, but our filter setting of 0.075 gives us that previous one, which is on the output. What would be on the input? Let's run that again. So if we doubled that, like twice as much should give us twice as much IR filter. This is a fairly simple linear way of doing it, I think. So 150. 0.15 gets us, hey, you know, that doesn't look half bad. That suggests that maybe we're just looking at a cascading effect, that both of the filters are fairly similar. Although I will point out one thing, these are both 20 hertz. But the combination of the two is taking stuff down here. We can do another thing as well, where I mentioned a combination of the two. Doing this twice will have the same effect. So this gives us the 1 factor, and then if we do it over again with the same settings, nope. Yeah, just stacking them isn't actually going to give us the same thing. So let's dial that back out. And stacking them didn't do that much. 0.7075 is correct for the output, but the input is apparently a smaller capacitor, or the way that the impedance of the op amp is handling it means it's a different thing. So let's see what 0.2 is giving us. That's too much, I think. See, the way this is, well, maybe it is, maybe it's not. The way that it's rolling off on the real thing is getting me back to 0 again once the 20 hertz tone has lost its energy. So this capacitor here definitely rolls off at 0. Question becomes, and there's our clip, and at a certain point it's not drained all the way to 0 yet, but then another point it kind of does. It's the amount of energy going into the circuit and how much can be drained away. And if we don't have clipping, it's draining away pretty completely at that amplitude. So that's maybe too much. What do we get here? I'm going to say it might be worth experimenting with that. So here, what we're going to do. Let's quit out of this entirely for now and go back to the actual code. As you can see, this is very simple. But what we need to do is enter in our filters. So let's go into the thing that we were using. Let's go into, let's see now, desktop. Here's your GitHub repository. We were using Drive. I'm not interleaving samples yet. And it's not actually an anti-aliasing thing there. It's going to be something else. So let's go into Mackity and add some IIRs in here. In this case, rather than interleaving them, we're going to call that just what we're going to use. Nope, already did that. Don't need to go back. We're going to want that. We're going to want to initialize it like that. And then we're going to want to take this. No. And we're now not using those things, so So we've now got that. We can punch the same values in and get a result on the output, although they might be slightly adjusted. We'll see. And we're going to steal this high pass section, which should work just fine as it is. And that's everything we needed from drive. And we're going to punch it in here in 2 places because we're not using the interleaving today. This is also the kind of thing that might require some control of denormalized numbers here. So I might punch that in while we're at it. Here's our output, so 1 on either side. A is going in and B is coming out, and I've got some changes to make up above too. I've got 3 things going on in my head at the moment. Here's one of them. We're not doing noise, we're just controlling the denormalized numbers. So that is now controlling these if they get too small and start becoming denormalized numbers. I've patched that in there. And we've got 2 filters going on, but we need to have IR amount A and IR amount B to be distinct. Typo. Now that should work. The warnings are probably nothing important. Oh, hang on, it's a little important. It would be useful if we had a name for this. I think we forgot to do that last time, so let's do that now. Mackity. Says try graph ignored. That means that we did not have a... Yeah, this is the console Mackie using the insert points for outputs plugin. And I have demonstrations of what that sounds like, and I can throw quick examples of what it would sound like analog versus the model. So, build, release, copy it over. It's a component, so we copy it over to that. Daydream Drums is the one using this particular type of roll-off, and this is our master. This is what the real thing sounds like. And we were using square waves to test it. So we're going to make a new file and dial this in a little bit using the square waves. Generate tones. Rectangle, 20 Hertz. 3 dB down. And let's do a minute of this. Now, one thing we can also do is let's fade it in. Now we're going to see what it looks like having that ramp up very slowly in volume. which is actually going to make all of these angles be slightly up, but that's fine. It's not big enough to make a significant difference. And now we're going to fire up Mackity again and dial in what I believe is our second and third. And the values we had that might not be exactly right, but they were pretty close, is 0.075 on the out, which is third, and 0.175 on the in. So what we should have here, if we move this over here, and it ramps up, we're going to slowly go into the distortion. There's two distinct high passes. So if we've got this working right, what we're going to see when we apply it is that two-angled effect. And as we're not distorting yet, we're getting only one angle. It's slowly ramping up, very slowly. Let's skip way ahead. Too much higher amounts of distortion, and we're seeing more or less what we were looking for, although we don't have nearly enough gain going on, so let's change that. Let's fire up Mackity and give it more gain. Hell, let's crank it. Let's see. We had an amount of crank that was comparable to what you got with the real thing. What do we got here? We've got an amount of distortion where it starts off as this roll off. This is a 20 hertz square wave. And as we keep cranking it, I feel like we have too much roll off. I think what's going on here is we have the amounts dialed in here, but we've got the amounts dialed in such a way that it wants to look at a interleaved high pass, which is what was happening in the drive. This is no longer an interleaved high pass, so what we'll do is delete that and have these amounts. So let's see. .875 and so that would be 0. No, that's fine. Now what do we got? Oh, have I screwed up terribly? Something went very strange. Yeah, that ain't right. Something happened. Nope, that's still a square wave. So let's find out what we did wrong here. Oh, I know what we did wrong. We rolled off after far too much. That shouldn't be 0.37, that should be 0.37. Now let's try it. There we go. Although now our input filter isn't doing anything. So let's undo that too. And let's go back in some more. It was about twice, so instead of 0.37, You know what? I'm just going to experiment. I'm just going to try dialing it in. At full crank, we do not have the two-angled effect. Yeah, here's the deal, is we just have too much gain going on. There's a limited area where we're getting the effect we were looking for. This is the roll-off, and then as we begin to distort it, it very quickly goes so distorted that we're getting that two-angled effect, and then we can very quickly saturate it so much that everything is just frying it to within an inch of its life. So let's undo that. Let's redo the fade in because it's still going to be useful, and fool with it just a little bit more by not distorting so hard. And we're going to try the, let's make it 04 and 08. Exactly double the roll-off on the input, which is not necessarily correct, but we'll see what we get anywho. I feel like our roll-off is not anything like what we were seeing. Like, remember, we can close these and pull up the real deal square wave measurement. We're supposed to be seeing something acting like this, but without the spikes, because we haven't coded the spikes in yet. That's the thing that we'll get out of the interleaf behavior. But we should be seeing something like this in those moments when it's at that point where part of it is distorting and part of it is not. And we're not. That doesn't look like the same thing to me. It's kind of in the zone, but it's not steep enough. Edit and go back. And again, this is all 20 Hertz square waves, so if we can dial this into work right, it's a start. Let's increase the distinction between the two and pull back that distortion even more, because we're getting into distorting in a big way. And here's our moment of truth. Let's make each of these be like, let's call it yay big, roughly a square shape, so that we can kind of see that it's the angles in question. And then this is also kind of like a square shape, where we can kind of see the angles in question. And at this point, we're already thoroughly distorted, and we're not rolling off the lows as much on the output, but the input is looking about right. Could maybe do with being a little tiny bit steeper, but you know something? That might happen through steepening the second filter. To 0.4, And we can also make that be 0.11 and see whether that gets us anywhere. That's looking a little bit like the right angle. Maybe not enough. Yeah, I'm feeling like that's not losing enough. Let's go back in one more time. I can keep dialing down the amplitude too. Let's ramp everything up a little bit more. 0.5 and 0.12. Yeah, sorry, there we go. Now it's starting to look a little bit more like the right amount of fall off. I have not made the slew distortion yet. Not even close. And here is where our, where are you? There you are. Here's where our two-stage, let's amplify this down some so that we can see it at a, hello. That doesn't seem right. Oh dear, what are we doing here? Okay, we've got everything selected. We want to amplify. Let's amplify everything by -6 dB, and maybe that will show me. Okay, yeah. Where these waves are sitting, other than I don't have that angle on there, that's starting to look about right. So you know what we got to do now? You might want to hear what the drums sound like through this as we have it. It's going to be a little darker because this is our distortion algorithm, but this is not attempting to do this edge. Like, as you can see, here's the difference. The real thing looks like this, and the algorithm that we're generating looks like this. All the samples are acting exactly the same. And what that means is we can fake this in a different way. We're actually getting the ripple we need. What we're not getting is the spike, which is exactly half the size of this ripple relative to the output. It's similar, but it's not similar enough. So here's the deal. Firstly, let's quit out of this now that we've got this sorted. But first, before we do that, let's undo, redo, and then go and write down the settings. These were the settings that we want. .12 in and 0.05 out. Now that we've written that down, the next file that we do, we'll try to apply the same settings. And we'll see how much closer we got. Here's our original drum track. And here's what we're trying to model. So that's all distorted. This is not. But when we apply Mackity, that's what our output looks like doing the whole entire file. And the levels are very different, but we're also going to change that. And careful not to hit Command S. I want to keep this original file there. I think it was about 18 dB down. No, it was not. Roughly 12 dB down. No, not that either. Okay, so now our comparisons are this, which is real. And this, which is fake. Real. There's definitely something on the highs that I'm not getting with the fake. And fake. Mind you, it's not worlds away, but so we'll put that back. And now let's start trying to get that new behavior going on, where we have the slight lift on the front edge of things. It needs to be a little bit more. We've got our drive settings okay. I would not be doing that. And we're also going to want to do some supersonic filtering here, which we're not doing yet. That's not going to be this kind of high pass. This kind of high pass is the roll-offs. This is the DC filtering built into it. And I think that's in the zone. But that's not all of it. That is not everything we need. So we could throw in a quick couple of biquads. In fact, we could throw in biquads in the way that I was doing with some of the other stuff, where the Q factors are staggered to be about the same, but rather than being like the tape effects, where the input is hyped with frequency to clip easier and then the output is smoother, the input can be smoother and the output can be hyped to accentuate the distortion products, and that might be the correct way of going about it. So let's see, I believe I have 2 filters in console 7 bus. Let's go and find out. I do. So we've got our IIR samples, and we've got, you know what, these can be long doubles too. Let's go bonkers. One of the things that I do with trying to get analog effects is to ruthlessly remove anything that acts like digital errors. So I'm generally comfortable keeping some of these with extra bits in them just to make sure that they're not truncating in any way. I've now got a couple of biquad filters in here as well. It might be worth listening to this as we go. There's our console 7 bus, and now I need to initialize them and make them work. And it's going to be fairly simple and straightforward because this is comparable to what we're already doing. So these guys, this gets blanked out. This bit gets copied straight over from what this is. And I'm going to put this in at the bottom of this beginning area. That is set to be exactly 20K, which may or may not be desirable. And these should be reversed. Or more. I know what I want to do. Let's see what we get off of this. I think you can do this where this equates to be a steep filter around the area of Butterworth, if not a little bit more. We're kind of peaking it. Let's see what it sounds like. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be correct. It has to sound right. So we're going to see what this sounds like with a noticeable resonant spike. And both of these are I don't need this to still say biquad A. It happens to be the same thing, but I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. So now we've got the biquad filters set up to work properly, and if I take these and copy them into here, they'll be biquad filters doing what they're supposed to. And they should go on both sides of the distortion part. So there's A and here's B. There's a distortion part of console 7 bus. So now we've got two biquad filters and two AAR filters that are high passes, but they're different kinds of filters, which I think is correct. Later, David. Cramping is not a word that relates here. Using long doubles means that all of my calculations are way more high resolution than they're ever going to need to be. So that's handy in its own little way. This should just work. Let's find out. It certainly compiled. And we'll close that out. This is still here, ready to go. Make it hide. And let's fire up both of these files again. Real thing and new breed. And tell you what, let us make a new document with this so that I can distort the crud out of it. So here's our target. And applying Mackity, I get this. Ooh, wait, no, I'm clipping like mad. I need to do another code change. I'm not quite done. I need to be able to pad this. So let us, do I have dry wet doing anything? I do, but let's make slider 9 be our output level. I called that output, yes? Yep. Okay, now I can scale it down. That's going to be necessary, because that's the amount of boosting I was getting off of the resonant filtering on the output of the distorted thing. That's why that was happening. All in all, it was just too much of a good thing. Back into the breach. Reference. Target. No document, just so I don't ruin anything. Reference. And let's fire this up. They actually sound kind of similar. So let's apply that and then we'll have a look at what we've got. So here's our reference. Here's what we got. Not a million miles off. Let's do that over again with a little more gain and a little more volume. Alright, so here's what we got. Real thing. Modified thing. And you can say much alike, but we still have some issues. One of them is this. We can take this and find that in here. That's not really the same. I'm having a hard time finding the same drum bit. Anyways, let's look at this one. Now I'm observing something interesting here. There's a degree of overshooting going on. You can plainly see that there's an overshooting going on beyond where the flat topping is, because we can see where the distortion is sort of buried in here, but that's kind of beyond what it is doing in the real thing. A little hard dialing that in. Come on, you. There we go. So this is what the real thing looks like when you're distorting bass and also having highs, and this is what the new one looks like when you're distorting bass and also having highs, and that's distinctly beyond what it is, and it's acting funny in other ways as well. Like weird little quirks like that don't really belong. So I'm thinking there's a couple of things that I can do here, and we're not going to save that. And one of them is dialing back the exaggeration I'm doing on this. So we'll go from, we'll see what we get. Now the system in console was designed to work with 3 factors. That's maybe part of my problem here. So it might behoove me to look up what I can get out of something else. Like as you can see, console bus there. And then console 7 channel is going to have a higher resonance. See, there's where we get this value. But the overall system is meant to work with a 0.5, 0.6, and 1.6. So that is perhaps not optimal. So what I'm going to be looking for here, and I might just want to do that well, I left my Wi-Fi on, so let's go and look on the web with my old version of Google Chrome. And I'm looking for Q factors that combine in multi-level filters to become something that averages out to a nice clean cutoff. So this is not going to help. If I'm really lucky, it'll help. But it's not going to help. Oh, look, it's me, Airwindows. So what I'm looking for is multiple pole filters. There sure as hell aren't many great matches for my search because I'm looking for the wrong things. Scaling of the coefficients for the poles of a biquad filter. So there we go. So that's not helpful either. Stacked is not the word to use for this. Multiple pole Butterworth. That being the smoothest roll-off that is not resonant. So cascading filters, this is going to be more along the lines of what we're looking for. And we're averaging out to a Q value of this, but they don't both have to be this. You can have both of those be 0.707106778. That's something that I can do. But I can also have one of them be shallower and one of them be steeper, and that's kind of what I'm working on. Although it might be worth trying this just to see what I get. But not here. See if both of those, if it was 0.5 and 0.618, this would be a shallower filter than necessary. This is now accurately Butterworth, double-sided Butterworth. So if I get out of here and attempt this one, make a new document with this, and let's slam it with the same settings we had before. Now see what our difference is there? This is accurately a Butterworth filter. That means it does not have resonance. That means the extra spikiness on the end is not significantly greater. Remember how it was fuzzier over the edges of this square waved out thing, which is kind of what we were looking for? Some of what we're trying to do could be done with just the arrangement of these filters. But this is not as much overshoot as we had in the real deal one, which is of course this, which is of course a distinctly added amount of extra fuzziness. We can plainly see the difference between these two. We can see where the square is, we can see where our distortion factor is, and we can see roughly how loud the high frequency overshoots are. Compared to that, this ain't much. It's obviously not boosted afterwards. So we'll get rid of that and start exploring with some of these alternate ways of doing this. We don't want them both to be a nice stable Butterworth, but we don't want this one to be 1.618, etc., because that didn't actually average out to being a nice stable Butterworth. That's what we're looking at right now, Jess. And no resonant peaks is not what we want here, because our output in the real hardware one is producing resonant peaks, or something very much like them, put it that way. So back into here, cascading filters. We're not being shown any examples. Fine, okay, we'll do something else. Cascaded biquads, similar concept. At some point, somebody's going to show me an example of cascaded biquads that will have different resonant filters, and they will have arrived at the correct numbers for them. We're averaging out to 0.7071 for accuracy, but that's not how you necessarily have to arrange them. And I've got this information somewhere, but I damned if I know where. This is one way of getting through this kind of stuff when you don't have the math and you didn't go to college. It may seem very silly, but other people might not be thinking to do this, and I think you'll hear what it does when I do. So, N order Butterworth, blah, blah, blah. Not seeing it. This is somebody's code. I wonder whether I can find this on my regular machine. I wonder whether I've got it tucked in there somewhere. In my Airwindows folder, maybe? Airwindows docs. You can't see what I'm doing right now, but with a bit of luck. Nope, this is about tonal ambiguity and access progressions. This is about the music theory stuff that I was talking about and not about what I'm looking for. So, not Airwindows docs. Maybe under Airwindows releases I've got it. Bessel Q values. Okay. Aha. Found it. F and Q values for implementing Bessel filter as second-order sections and Bessel polynomials in Python. All values.txt. Q for N. So this is actually Bessel filters, not Butterworth filters, but this is still going to give us the thing. For instance, we've got a fourth order, which is, well, I'd kind of like to go for Butterworth though. But we can see what we get. See you later, Bo. I'm not going to go much longer than this, but I'm onto something, so we're going to continue. See what we get here that you can't see because I'm not able to show it to you right here. Although I could search for it. Let's see whether. Okay, this is what I was looking at. I do not know whether they also have Butterworth. Oh, hello, they do have Butterworth. Yay! Cool. Except for this is too steep. Oh man, this Butterworth stuff is far too steep. Oh no, wait, this is the multiplier for what we've had. Okay, so we need to calculate this out from what it was. So this is what I was looking at on the regular computer. I can close it because I found it on the web. And you can make a Bessel filter, which is a shallower filter than the Butterworth, with either starting out with this or these two in sequence, which will amount to the same thing. Like you start out with a 0.8 and then you go to a 0.5, and the combination of the two as two cascaded filters gives you this. That's how this works. You can also do starting out with a much steeper and then rapidly doing less steepers to some which are close to 0.5. In fact, some of them, you get enough pulse going on, some of your end-up filters will end up being 0.5 Q factor. And that's how we arrange these very steep filters out of multiple smaller filters. So what I'm looking for is two poles like this, but that will do Butterworth instead of Bessel. Bessel is shallower than I want, I think. But one thing we can do is at least try what this is. But what we're doing here is we are doing it in inverse order for a specific reason, and I'll tell you why. We're doing the first one as the shallower filter, and then we're doing the second one as slightly steeper than Butterworth, meaning it's going to be slightly resonant, and that slight resonance is what's going to cause the overshoots. Let's build this, and I will show you that this is going to be the same kind of filter, meaning that if we're doing it this way, we can use a more resonant filter as part of the stage, but when it's not distorting, it's not going to be a EQ change other than the high pass. The average of these filters is not a resonant peak. They compensate for each other. But then when you start distorting, stuff gets interesting, and we're going to see what that does. Let's build this again. I don't remember whether I built it the first time. Copy it over. hide the rest of this stuff, and copy that to a file. I should remember the finger shortcut for it. Hello. That was a bad drum beat. Did it about it. And now what we get starts to look, although it's still, it could do with being a little more irregular, I think. But see what we've got here? We can see the amplitudes of the flat part, and we can see the amplitudes of where the highs go. And the highs are indeed spiking above the level of that. And that is because, and this is also why I think we need a Butterworth rather than a Bessel roll-off, because the Butterworth is already steeper. Butterworth is as steep as you can get without actually having a cumulative presence peak. We also might consider turning the frequency down a little bit, because this is a exactly 20K filter being executed at 96K. I'm not convinced that the Mackie is actually a exactly 20K filter. It might be a little lower than that. We'll find out. But we're getting into the zone here, but this is not as much overshoot as we had with the real deal device. We can see that it's there, but it's not the same. Oh boy, we got high winds out there. So we're going to not save that, and let's go back to this F multiplier to get the same asymptotes as Butterworth for n equals. I'm thinking what this means is we need 0.8 times 1.058. So that's somewhat cumbersome, but I can do it. Easy way to do it is to just sort of directly do it. Times. I'm pretty sure that's what they meant. So we go from 0.8055 to 0.852. That seems promising. The other one's going to go in the opposite direction very slightly, which also seems promising. So now our final one is this now. And our second one started out as this. And ends up being oh good Lord, that can't be true. I'm not sure I believe that. I guess we could find out, can't we? Yeah, this can't be right because it says Q for N 0.577, which is presumably Butterworth. I mean Bessel. Multiplied by 1. That can't be right. Well, we'll try it and see what we get. I may very well not be understanding this correctly, but that doesn't mean we can't try it. That's pretty close to 0.5, so it's shallower than 0.5. If it turns out to be exactly the right thing, I will be happily mistaken that it was the wrong thing. Oh, have to quit out this program first. Boop. Next thing I do is search for the same thing as Butterworth instead of Bessel. And I'm going to copy pieces out of this so that I can dial them in more accurately. I like that chunk. That's good. And then very similar, do I have a way of... So roughly 14 seconds to 21 seconds. Cool. I don't think that relates to this though. No, maybe that was it. That seems plausible. And new document for you too. I'm going to save these separately, I think. We'll go from here. And we'll stop there. Won't be a particularly good groove, but it'll be a something. And I believe we can edit from here. Actually, no, hang on. That ain't right. It is here that I trimmed. Okay. Now let me quickly save some of these things. Shouldn't need to save it as flex or anything like that. Save this. How much do you see is it taking up? Damn if I know. So here's our real thing. here, as soon as I edit that a little bit, save it, is what the new breed looks like, which I gotta say, this is not... Things about this are not lining up exactly the same as I expected, although it's kinda... I don't know, let's listen to it. Whereas real one sounds brighter. I think we're not done. In particular, we're not going to save the changes there. Let's see whether we have a search that we could do for Butterworth filters. Because what we're seeing here is kind of what we're doing with this. And I might just be able to tweak it, honestly. When you have a filter that's supposed to be good and flat, like this red one here, that is Butterworth. You can combine the slower filter with the steeper one as long as it's not too extreme. As you can see, these ones that peak out, that's what's also going to happen to the amplitude of the output. And we still haven't done anything with slew limiting. We're doing this all with filtering and relatively normal clipping. So, not only that, it might be worth fooling with our pre-existing means of clipping and such. Another thing about it is when you roll off slower, more highs are getting through to be clipped. So yeah, what we're getting is the combination of these two things. You have two of these that are rolling off differently, and the combination becomes the third thing. Another possibility, we could arrive at this experimentally. Like, rather than trying to calculate it out, I can just put it on one of those sliders and control both of them at once so that they start off as being that, or I could have only the output. Well, I don't know. I think maybe it might be a fine idea to have both of them clip, get the sound that way. I can have the Q factors match so long as they're both steep enough. That, or I can just start with straight up Butterworth 0.7071 and diverge in opposite directions. Oh no, but that's going to be shallower. 0.5 and 0.7071 is going to be shallower. We had a working filter that does the same thing, which is 0.5, 0.618, etc., and 1.618, etc. That's a valid configuration. Trouble is, I'm not looking for that, and I don't want the third filter stage in there. So we're going to try to do it with two filter stages. And I think this is probably where we start actually just winging it. Sometimes you got to just wing it. So this is where things get amusing. output is parameter 9. We're not going to want to touch that, but tweak is parameter 8. It's going to start at 0 and it's going to go to 1. We're not going to go anywhere near 1, but tweak is always going to be larger than 1. There. Now they're going in opposite directions. And since they can't literally be plus and minus because it would make the shallow one be much too low Q, instead we're going to be multiplied and divided. And 0.7071 multiplied by 2, which is our current maximum, is like 1.4. And we know that 1. Let's see what we get. Overthinking it. Slider 8 was not declared in this scope. That's because I need to take this bit out now. There we go. Oh. I keep forgetting to quit the... Come on, you. And now we open both of these guys, and it's time to dial stuff in by ear. I'm listening to just that hat. That's real. This is a cool jam, huh? So now we're trying to get here from here. See what the meters are doing? We're at minus 12 until we start adding this frequency, and we can get quite a lot more. It is also sounding about right. It's a little too smooth, and that may be a little too exaggerated. Let's quickly have a look at what we got. Here's our original. Here's the change. So as we expand this outwards a little bit, I'm not sure if we want to expand it outwards a little bit. We'll zoom in on this. It's hard to zoom in on this. And this is what some of our stuff looks like there. And we're not a million miles off. I think what I'm going to want to do is I don't know, expand this window maybe? Expand that window as far as it'll go, expand this window as far as it'll go. You might not be able to see this super well. But yeah, if this can be made to react like that, there's a fair chance that I'm getting the highs in this aspect at least. I haven't even got any slew clipping going on yet, but we can get the amount of high emphasis over the regular sound sorted by dialing in some of these until they're right. Okay, I need more boost out of it and a little bit less of this extra emphasis. Actually, you know what? This is going to be relevant to look at too. So, and again, look at only the one side. Expand it outwards until I can kind of... Oh, hang on, stop that. I didn't need it to do that, oh no. Have it you not do that, please. Thank you. So this is kind of showing me where clipping is. And it's also kind of showing me where the high frequency spiking is, because that's a bright high frequency spike. This is this weird combination between audio, visual, measurement, God knows what. There is, however, going to be a degree of relevance to it all, so we do what we can, I guess. And on into Mackity, let's see what we had. Oh wow, okay. My lows are not stretching around as nearly as much as I thought they should. That's weird. Part of this is because my amplitude could be a little higher. And I think I might be able to distort a little more. No, I can't, because it won't let me. That's as much gain as I can make. But I can fake it. Let's start with this. No, let's do 3 dB. That's a nice clean amount. Now let's go and boost it. That might have given me enough. Apply and close. I'm feeling like it still needs to be more. More. Does this distort? Do I care? Let's find out. Let's find out if it gets me there. You might be able to work out what I'm attempting to do, which is, oh, nope, that's definitely not right. Now I've got too much gain, and the trajectory, as you can see, is not exactly something going on here where the, I'm trying to get the ballistics of this to work right. It might have to do with my high passes. A little tricky. All this is available to be tweaked, but I've been dialing it in pretty successfully so far, so I'm not sure I want to mess with that. Let us undo that and undo this. And let's try to get sort of more gently in the zone here. And when I do this, it's a little more sustained, but not all that much. It's kinda. Except for I have too much highs. This is the real one. This is softer. And it's too much gain. Yeah. All right. Continue tweaking. Can't entirely go by appearances either. Sometimes you got to go by sound. So let's dial that back a hair. And this is the one that's important. You need to dial back more than a hair. Okay, that might be too much, but still too much gain. Looks a little different, but I can't go by looks. In fact, how about we cut all that boostiness and go back to the beginning again? What do we got? Oh, hey, interesting. All of a sudden, it's starting to look a little more similar. What does it sound like? That's the important part. This could be louder. Have a hair brighter. Maybe that's too loud. One thing about it, we're starting to get very similar sounding. I feel like this fake one has slightly more bass than the other one. Even though I dialed it in with like square waves and stuff, I feel like this could use a little more of a trim. So back to square one. And let's see where we're getting. I boosted it a little more than it needed to be. I think I can pull this back. Can pull that back. And larger number means more bass roll off. Larger number on the output means more base roll-off after the distortion. More base roll-off after the distortion will make this shape smaller because this is distorted fully with bass frequencies going into the clipping. So it's going to become a little more of this then. Which interestingly makes it be exactly twice as much as the other. What have we got now? Real? Fake. Too much gain. The shapes I'm seeing here are interesting. You can't go by shapes though. I mean, you change scaling a little bit and the shape is going to be different. It's tricky that way. Okay, real. Fake. Hello. Real. Fake. We're starting to get into the zone, folks. It's even looking similar. We're starting to get into the zone without any slew limiting being applied. That's interesting. Of course, it is being applied by our filtering. Our filtering is making this happen. Now, the last thing I'm wondering is, let's dial this all back, seeing as next time I run it, it'll have all those settings, so I don't have to panic about making them work. I wonder whether I can dial in these frequencies. Yeah, I thought so too. That was getting really close. Let's leave it at that. This tweak factor seems to be about working, and dial in the frequency of cutoff. This whole thing is being run on 96K files, so it's doing a pretty good job of dialing that in. Slider 7 can become roll-off, frequency roll-off. So if I make this be 30K times roll-off, then going to exactly a third is going to give me my 20, that, or I could do 40K. At which point it still should, yeah, that will still work. But 0.5 is going to be my new setting. So run. Alrighty. Back into the breach with the new control. None of these controls are labeled anymore. I'm moving too fast. Here's our real. Here's our clean. I don't think we necessarily need to isolate it so narrowly down anymore. And here's Mackity. Maybe we do though. At 20K. And we can tell what it does. It does this. It's my frequency roll off for the anti-aliasing filters. They were previously at exactly 20K, and now they can be anything I want. Like higher than 20K. So the question there is, what sounds more like this? Yeah, I'll have them both running at once. How about that? You're too bright. Okay, this is a weird experience, but it's kind of working. So with this, I'm basically playing them both at the same time, trying to make it sound like literally an echo. It's tricky and maybe not optimal. Too close, man. The second echo is the fake one. Interesting. This is beginning to sound very much like literally the same thing over again. This makes it a little bit more pipey. I don't know, folks, this is interesting. Yeah, we might have a result here. Yeah, this is one way to do stuff. It's an unusual way, but it is a way. You're trying to kind of go for the gestalt of the experience. And remember, this is not an echo off of the real one. This is a real one with a fake one off of the raw signal that never saw analog. Like, here is our real analog distorted thing through a genuine Mackie, and the echo has never seen a Mackie. You know, it's just my process. It's not everybody's process, but I get my results. Feeling very, very identical to me. So now I write this stuff down. Still tweaking. Listen to bass now. All right. And then stuff like the output gain, I don't actually have to care about because that's not relevant. That's just matching this stuff. Yeah, again, this is not an echo on the analog. This is the analog being immediately followed by purely digital Mackie emulation. I think we're in the zone. I think you'll be able to use this come Sunday. And I didn't actually have to add slew clipping because it kind of already is there. Alrighty. So now what we're going to do is hard code some of that stuff in because we have arrived at it and solved it. Those were the correct settings. So 0.123 to the third power. I'll calculate those out later. 0.066 to the third power. Well, equals 0.479. The tweak is 1.638. Gain can be anything. Actually, let's enhance this just for laughs. Oh, that's going to be way too much though. So let's make it like 9 or 10 or something. Not too insane. Factor of 64 to a factor of 100. Those are all fine. No reason not to just delete this at this stage. Those could go away. And this is the nature of this device. You got an output trim because we're going to need one, but it's mostly just set up so that the input trim acts the way that the real input trim does on the real device. And we're going to do some of these things so that it'll look and act like, is there a, can I go and find my original one? Where did I put it? Hang on, I want to go and see what the label on the actual device says. Be right back. My fire's going out. Fortunately, it's not that cold here. Trim. That control is called trim. It is labeled for mic and line gain, but they wind up being about the same, really. It winds up being a good solid 40 dB boost. Alright, so back I am. Those things can go away. I'll deal with this later. And pad is just straight up sure, if you want to grab off of the YouTube video or whatever, knock yourself out. I don't see why not. In trim and out pad, both of those will fit into the VST, which is nice. Don't have too many letters. 2 parameters. We are getting down to this being okay, and don't be needing, hello, no breakpoint please. And let's edit all in scope. So that they say the same thing as the label says. And we'll go with that. Let's move this too. Alrighty. Steadily we progress. Now if we build it, it will not complain. Says no issues. It's always nice to have no issues. Few people can claim that they have no issues. I don't have any issues with this plugin today. Replace the older item. And let's load up firstly our little work files. And I'm going to load up the whole entire thing. But as we've got clean available, let's fire this up. Was that set correctly? I changed outpad, but that doesn't correspond to anything useful. Let's see. Oh no, outpad is lower than it needs to be. It was around here somewhere. Maybe a little quieter. Anyways. Real. Fake. Yeah, that ain't quite right. This can be less. This can be a little quieter. Now that seems closer to what we were looking at. Oh, I know why. I adjusted the maximum gain. gave us a little more gain. That's what happened. So let's adjust it to fit. Gosh, that looks very similar to what the other one does. We got it. Yeah, it sounded more aggressive because the gain was different. There you have it. Mackie emulation. It's done. We're good. It just got a little cleaning up to do. And that also means we can run it on the original input and flow with it as we go. So here's our full volume. We can get clipping if we push it too hard, so we have to pad the output if we're saturating it super hard. That gets you the Mackie style saturation and distortion. We can rein it in a little bit, pad it, or this is what you get when you turn it up all the way. We done it. This works. It does trim all the way down to 0. I think that's fine. And here's our full distortion, but we can get that soft clip factor going too. In fact, it's a really weird soft clip factor because this is dual mono, but the channels are coming out differently. Probably because the brightest channel is that one. Well, not anymore, it isn't. Yeah, the channel that is brightest is going to give you the hottest output. You can dial it right back if you want. Alrighty, we have Mackity. Not only that, I will finish off the day by demonstrating a little something we like to call alien kittens and what that would do run into a Mackie. Dun dun dun! So pretty clean and unpadded. And then when you start cranking it out, I'm feeling the correct changes in bass. This is a very hot hot track, so everything is going to distort. No Mackity? Mackity. Interim just needs to be much lower. Interim could be like 0.1. Yeah, it seems about right. Bypassed. And in. You know, and I think that does make logical sense, actually. And I'll tell you why. It's because gain trim is parameter 1 times 10, so 0.1 is equal to 1, and then it's multiplied by itself. So anything below 1 is a pad, and above 1 gets you into that cranking the trim knob all the way. But yeah, this works. Now I just need to make sure that that default setting is not meltdown, kill everybody. Oh, default setting is meltdown, kill everybody. Nope, nope, that's no good. Alrighty, now default setting is unity gain. Channel 9 Mackie setting is nothing compared to this. It's not even close. I mean, don't even worry about it, alright? Don't even worry about it. Channel 9 Mackie setting is nothing remotely compared to this. If for no other reason than it doesn't have the gain staging. You can run them into each other, but it's not going to do much. It's not going to help. This is probably going to be the one you want, because the thing is, that Mackie input stage, it's a distortion box. It's straight up a distortion box. So that's the only thing you really need to worry about. Oh, hello, delivery. So let's save you. Let's build that. And I'm going to bid you folks good day. Talk to you later.